The United States has dropped from being number 11 in 2012 on the World Happiness Report of the United Nations to being 24th last year. Poor African countries, of course, and places like Afghanistan are below. But for a country as rich as us, we are pretty unhappy. So one example is the city of Philadelphia, which took a lot of vacant, empty lots that were filled with garbage and chain link fences and vacant houses that were covered with graffiti and run down, and actually changed those places into beautiful green spaces with trees and grass, and in many cases, community gardens. There was something like 1,400 interventions that were done in the city of Philadelphia. And the result was that crime in those areas dropped by about 30%. People were 50% more likely to say that they didn't live in fear to be out in their community. Happiness levels increased by 15, 20%. One estimate was that every dollar that was spent on these beautification efforts could save as many as $70 in terms of crime and health and the treatment of these other kinds of things. So even conservatives who are concerned with budgets and with frugality in spending ought to be supporters of this.
Hi, welcome back to a whole new edition of Code Green, Conversations for a Future We Want and Kids Deserve. I am freshly back from New York City, actually in Portugal, taking some time off from the disunited, dysfunctional, not so United States, but had a whirlwind week of running around with tens of thousands of other climate advocates and experts and activists, and so many events. I probably could have gone to 2 others at any given time, and went to a lot that was fabulous, but also missed a lot. Now, without further delay, I am very pleased to introduce my friend, longtime friend, and someone I've admired as long as I've been doing this, which is about 28, 29 years. John de Graaf is a filmmaker, an author, a professor, a genius, really, a visionary. He saw early on that we are more than our stuff, and that does not define success. It does not define happiness. And he has done so much in terms of content creation, including a documentary that first got my attention called Affluenza, and then later Escape from Affluenza, also a book, also one called Take Back Your Time, and a few others, the Happiness Initiative. You've just basically been a very creative guy on stuff that matters. So really excited to have you to chat with today, John.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is mine, Betsy. I've loved your work over the years.
Thank you. And most recently, you've done a documentary that I just watched that had me verklempt before the 3-minute mark. And that is about a woman I had not heard of. Why don't you tell us all about what prompted you to do this really fascinating film about someone who should be much better known, and hopefully after this documentary will become so?
Well, I like to tell stories of people who made a difference. One of them, our mutual friend David Brower, I made a film about him way back almost 40 years ago now, the environmentalist, but many different people, most of them still living when I made the film, so I could interview them and know them. But this woman died in 1929. Her name is Katharine Lee Bates, and she's actually the woman who wrote the very popular song, America the Beautiful, which is, I came to discover, a song which most Americans terribly misunderstand. And that doesn't matter whether they're on the blue side or the red side of the political spectrum. They both seem to think that this song is some sort of rah-rah, patriotic, America first, go America song, when it is in fact anything but. It's actually a serious critique of the world that Katharine Lee Bates lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's a critique, for example, of American imperialism in the Spanish-American War, with lines like, America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, don't expand. Lines like, America, America, may God thy gold refine, a critique of the Gilded Age, which is with the great separation between rich and poor. Many things like this. And she was a reformer, an activist, a supporter of immigrant rights, a supporter of workers' rights, a supporter, certainly, obviously, of women's rights, an advocate for Native Americans, African Americans, the issues of the day. Not as much the environment, because it wasn't such a big issue in those days, but she did bemoan the cutting of the forests and some of those kind of things that people saw at that time, and supported things like the preservation of those things. But anyway, her story is a wonderful story. I think an empowering story for women. But she was also a poet, and that's this song started out as a poem, which she started writing on the top of Pikes Peak in Colorado when she saw the beautiful scenery around her, the great mountains to the west and the great fields of grain to the east and so forth. So what she wanted to say in that song was that America was blessed with all this land and beauty and things, but our institutions and the way we treat each other did not match the beauty of the landscape. And until the country had brotherhood and compassion and not just wealth, then if that didn't happen, we would simply go the way of all the previous empires in history. And that's what she wrote to her friends after writing the song.
Hmm. So it's a shorter film, about 36 minutes. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I learned so much. I was very moved. It could not be more current, ironically. I suppose that has a lot to do with why you chose this subject at this moment.
Well, absolutely, and it is such an irony. This is a popular song with everybody. We understand that, but this song was played at the Republican convention. It was played at the Trump inaugural. It was played recently at the Charlie Kirk Memorial in Arizona with President Trump dancing to the music.
It's that.
And the fact is that this woman stood absolutely opposed to all the things that this current administration is doing. She was an ally of immigrants. She would have abhorred the treatment of immigrants that's going on today. She was a great defender of the poor and social justice. She would have abhorred what's happening with all the tax cuts to billionaires while health care and food is taken away from poor people. She would have abhorred the treatment of women. She would have certainly been a DEI advocate, not necessarily in those terms, but she did stand up for the rights of everybody. So it is such an irony that this song, which was really about bringing people together, is now being used as if it's something about America first, which was not. She was an internationalist. Trump, at his inauguration, praised President McKinley as the great president. He even changed the name of Denali, the mountain, back to Mount McKinley. Well, there was no president that Katharine Lee Bates despised more than President McKinley. She didn't want him assassinated, but she hated his policies in the Spanish-American and Philippines War and his efforts to take over other countries. So that needs to be understood, and I hope this kind of film is shown in the schools and things so we can start to really understand our history. Now, that aside, this woman was not anti-American. She was a huge patriot. She believed in the country, and she believed in it enough to want to make it all it could be and to insist that it live up to the ideals which she firmly believed in.
She was such a humanitarian, and she would be rolling over in her grave with all the ugliness we're seeing. America the Beautiful, not so beautiful now.
Yeah, the
So,
great big beautiful bill.
yeah, not so beautiful for our planet and people. We
Oh
can
no,
talk
on the
about
planet too. And again, that
that.
was a little after her time. She wouldn't have understood anything like global warming in her time, but I suspect, given her the way she reacted to everything in her time, she would be right with us on those things.
Right. And she would probably not have understood affluenza, although perhaps she was hinting at that.
Oh, oh, she did understand that. And in fact, part of the line confirm thy soul in self-control is not only a critique of imperialism, as she writes, it's a critique of consumerism. It's a critique not of everybody, but of certainly the glamour and glitz and overconsumption of the rich in the Gilded Age.
Acquisition, affluenza, a plague
Mm-hmm.
getting worse, not better. And of course, all the stuff that people don't need that's being manufactured in China and emissions, and our planet is dying in apoplectic fits, and just it's that's what's so maddening. I know we are we happier, John, as a country for all this affluenza?
No, I think the indication is certainly that that's not true. I mean, it is true that the wealthier countries in the world are generally a bit happier than the very poor countries of the world. But after a certain point of comfort, it works the opposite. The happiest countries in the world are primarily in Scandinavia, Northern Europe, countries that consume and probably too much, but not nearly as much as Americans do, and at least have more awareness and for one thing, they have a lot more free time. They don't work themselves to death, so they have the time for community and care and taking interest in the environment and things like that. The United States has dropped from being number 11 in 2012 on the World Happiness Report of the United Nations to being 24th last year.
That's just
Again, it's wealthier countries who, the poor African countries, of course, and places like Afghanistan are below. But for a country as rich as us, we are pretty unhappy.
And I can tell you, just having spent a little bit of time in Portugal over the last couple of years, it's much simpler life. People are happier. Going to large events. Our town called Quevedo in the Algarve has a big event every June, and 35,000 people come pouring into this old fishing village. They wanted to kind of go on the map as a little bit more of a tourist town, which is why we leave by July. Um, there's no guns, there's no violence, there's no, drunks in the street, and there's grandparents and babies. It's much more family oriented. This is not news to anyone who's been lucky enough to spend time in Europe, but it strikes me, like I don't have to worry about some nut, with these giant crowds, opening up an assault rifle. Isn't that sad that as an American I have to think that way? But I do. And then now I feel like I'm going a little European. It's hot and sunny and gorgeous here. Just did a couple loads of laundry, and we got a clothesline, and we just put it up on our back porch and just hung up, 3 loads of laundry. And I think it's dry in about 10 minutes because it's hot here. They do need more rain, a little bit of a drought, but it's simpler. It really is. And it feels more pure. It feels less crazy. It really does. We try to not turn on.
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
digress.
yeah.
Let's talk
Anyway, go ahead.
another
I've noticed
recent
that
film.
too.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I guess what I'm saying in 2025, it's still true. It's not just folklore, I mean, sure, things have changed, but it still basically has those values, family values, and not crazy violence, and you don't see homeless people. What a show.
Yeah.
Um, so a recent
Yeah.
film that I saw that you did on Stewart Udall, I learned a lot about him as well. An interesting subject for you, and another person who Americans would love to know more about. Tell us why you chose him as a subject and why he was special.
Sure. Well, Stu Udall was the Secretary of the Interior under the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. Probably no public official did more for environmental quality in this country. He was the person most responsible for the Clean Air and Water Acts, the Endangered Species Act, the Environmental Protection Agency, the creation of many national parks, wilderness areas, the Wilderness Act, things of that sort. So that was in office. But he was also a great American advocate, for instance, of civil rights. He was an advocate of social justice in many ways, a great supporter of Native Americans, and he was a guy who was sort of impeccably true to his values. I first met him in 1988 when I interviewed him for the film I did about David Brower. And I interviewed him because Stewart Udall and David Brower initially were on opposite sides of a fight. Udall was at that time the Interior Secretary. His Bureau of Reclamation wanted to dam the Grand Canyon. And initially, everybody in the Johnson administration was in favor of that, and Udall supported it too. In fact, as an Arizona politician, he was from Arizona, he had to because Arizona was all about water and dams and all those things. But David Brower and others convinced Udall that the Grand Canyon dams were a mistake. They should, and he took a trip down the canyon himself, and he saw the beauty that would be lost if those dams were built. And he said, there will be no Grand Canyon dams. And when I talked to Stewart, he said, well, the most important thing for a public official is to be open-minded. And David Brower showed me I was wrong. He showed me this is not something we should do. And for that, Udall said, will always be in his debt.
Mm.
And it's a hard thing to imagine a public official saying that, but oh, I really in the debt of this person who showed me I was wrong. You know,
Mm.
public officials are loath to admit they're ever wrong. So this was Stewart Udall. He wasn't always right, but he was a person who wanted to do right. And when the facts showed him something else, and he was interested in the facts, he changed. He was also the first major political figure in the United States to speak about global warming. And he wrote about it in the mid 60s and talked about it. He did so because Roger Revelle, who was then was the Smithsonian, was his science advisor. And Revelle had also done oceanographic studies showing the warming of the ocean. Even then, we knew this by the mid '60s. And so Udall warns in a book, and even in '68, that Miami is going to be flooded, that the Arctic is going to melt, that all kinds of impact is going to. He didn't know what we know now, but impact is going to come from this. And he, and then a little bit later, Daniel Moynihan, were really the first American officials who spoke out about global warming. And to the end of his life, it was a great issue for Stewart. He died in 2010. And in the last years of his life, he was out there campaigning against climate change.
And there were some other politicians in the Udall family, correct? At least,
Yeah.
oh, you
His son Tom was a U.S. senator from New Mexico, great senator who later became ambassador to New Zealand under the Biden administration. Tom was the sponsor of many great environmental bills, including the Great American Outdoors Act, which was actually the most bipartisan bill passed during the first Trump administration. Had about 2/3 of the members of both houses of Congress. And this was a great expansion of funding for our national parks and our public lands to support them. And of course, now all that is under threat. All that has been cut back. We're dealing with enormous threats to the public lands and so forth, kinds of things that would have horrified the Udalls. But Tom and others like him were great. His nephew Mark was a U.S. senator from Colorado,
who's
also a great.
Morris Udall? Mo Udall? Am I making that up? Was that?
And oh yes, and his brother Mo Udall was a U.S. congressman from Arizona. Stewart won the seat first, and then when Kennedy appointed him Interior Secretary, his brother Mo won the seat and was in that seat in Congress for 30 years. In 1972, 76, I'm sorry, in 1976, Mo ran for president of the United States. He finished second in 7 consecutive primaries to Jimmy Carter, who eventually got the Democratic nomination for president. So Mo didn't make it, but he, I think, would have been a great president had he made it. And he had a great influence on Carter in any case. And so it was Mo whose bills were the great Alaska protection bills that led to a lot of land protection in Alaska and to support of natives in Alaska, bills that he convinced Carter to support.
Hmm. Before we move on from movies, where can people find the documentary about Stewart Udall and also the One America the Beautiful?
They're both distributed by Bullfrog Films. And so the best thing to do would be to go to bullfrogfilms.com and just put in the names of the film: Stewart Udall, The Politics of Beauty, and From Sea to Shining Sea. That's the Bates film. And you'll see how you can get uh, copies of the film or streaming of the film or do community screenings of the film, which we hope people will do. The other thing we hope is that people will encourage their libraries to buy these films, because that's where they're most likely to get out there and be seen
And
publicly by people.
Bates was an early feminist too. I may have touched on that, but that was a
Oh,
big
yeah.
of the film. I think that's another message that a lot of people, mostly women, would like to hear right now. We need to be empowered to speak up.
Oh, absolutely. And she was a pioneer with others in terms of women's rights. And she was a quiet activist. She was not what you might call a rabble rouser. She was, but in her way, in her poetry, in her speeches, and the things, she very much an advocate in her work with a settlement house in Boston with poor immigrants, women from Italy primarily, in that, in all those ways. And she lived with her partner, a female partner. We don't know fully the nature of that relationship because things were in the closet in those days, and it wasn't and it also wasn't her number one concern. It was simply true that professors at Wellesley College, where she taught in those days, who were virtually all women, could not marry a guy without losing their job. So almost all the women faculty at that time lived with other women.
Yeah.
And those were close, loving relationships. Whether they were physical, we don't know. And in my view, it doesn't matter. Although I've been criticized for hiding the lesbian nature of Katharine Lee Bates' relationship, I didn't do that. I simply told what we knew, which
Right.
is that they had a loving, long-term relationship, but we don't know the nature of it.
Right. And really what doesn't matter, and especially in today's, lifestyle fluidity, really it matters less. So I want to talk to you about the speech you gave at the Sorbonne last year. I read it, and boy, that had a lot of gems in there. You talk about, you actually named some research studies that have shown that beauty is perhaps a path to unity. Maybe that's a little naive given how divided we are right now, but just the nature of beauty, the beauty of nature, how, I mean, we know how soothing it is and how we need it more than ever, and we're destroying it more than ever. But give us a kind of just a few pieces of evidence that show that this is something we should take more seriously.
Well, certainly we do have a lot of evidence that being in nature and parks and green space has a great positive effect on health. We even have a ParksRX movement in the United States, which uh, uh, started by doctors who actually gave prescriptions to their stressed out patients of things like go and spend a few hours in the park. Don't take a pill, go to the park, or take your stressed out kids to spend some time in nature. So we know so much. We have so much evidence about the health impacts. Now, the other thing is that people really appreciate beauty. It has a huge effect on happiness. So we see from studies, nothing is terribly completely conclusive because they're not enough of them, and the rigor demanded. But what we've seen from these studies is that people who think that the place that they live is beautiful or somewhat beautiful, on average, are 20% happier than people who think that the place where they live is dull, not pretty, or
Very,
even ugly.
yeah.
And that seems to repeat itself in all the studies, and that's big. Now that means that out of a scale of 10, that's 2 full points. That's people go from 6 to 8 just because they feel like they live in beautiful surroundings. And so I'm working on a book called Toward a Politics of Beauty, or A Politics of Beauty, that examines a lot of those things and what we know about them.
And of course, it's easier to live in beautiful places if you have a lot of money, and people don't choose to be born in the housing projects. But, it's an example of how can one be inspired and motivated, for better when their surroundings are depressing. And yet they have found, or you've cited at least one study which showed that just a little bit of community, input and going in and planting some trees and better lighting and all those things that you can do did make a difference. Maybe not dramatic, but just somewhat is better than nothing.
Well, sometimes a pretty dramatic difference. And one example is the city of Philadelphia, which took a lot of vacant, empty lots that were filled with garbage and chain link fences, and vacant houses that were covered with graffiti and run down, and actually changed those places into green, beautiful green spaces with trees and grass, and in many cases, community gardens and those kinds of things. There were something like 1,400 interventions that the University of Pennsylvania uh, looked at that were done in the city of Philadelphia in that regard. And the result was that crime in those areas dropped by about 30%, that people were 50% more likely to say that they didn't live in fear to be out in their community. Happiness levels increased by 15, 20% generally for people. So you had an enormous impact. One estimate was that every dollar that was spent on these beautification efforts could save as many as $70 in terms of crime and health and the treatment of these other kinds of things. So even conservatives who are concerned with budgets and with frugality in spending ought to be supporters of this.
Ought to be. Well, we're out of time, John. I could go on and ask you about your next project, which is equally interesting. We'll have to have you back when that's ready for prime time. But I so applaud you, your decades of work on things that are so important in our society. You were a visionary and still are. And I want more people to know about you and your work, your books, your documentaries, and love that you're still creating at this later stage in life and so much to fix, right? Now more
Well,
than ever.
thank you, Betsy, and you too. And I'm sorry to be so long-winded.
No, no, no.
I promise not to be, and I'm a hypocrite, So
Well, I love my guests so much, and there's always so much to talk about, especially those who have been at this a long time, that it's easy to go long. But hopefully, our viewers found it interesting. I hope they'll pass it along. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. The name of the series is Code Green, Conversations for a Future We Want. And if you subscribe and we get enough viewers, I can go get some green sponsors, and then Betsy doesn't have to fund it anymore after 28 years, putting me in the red. But I'm doing okay. Luckily, I'm married, not homeless. But we need more viewers for this to be worth my time and yours. So this is for everybody. I try not to make it too technical or highfalutin. We're not doing this for fellow environmentalists. God bless the environmentalists, the choir. That's who I interview. It's for everybody else who wants to know more, needs to know more, and deserves the very best for themselves, their health, their families. And hopefully we're learning that if we don't vote for representatives at all levels that understand science and don't care about solutions for our health, our economy, our future, our grandchildren, then, what's it worth? What do you say? I didn't even get to take back your time. But what's the economy for anyway? That's one of your books. So I hope people will check out John de Graaf. He is a pioneer and one worth paying attention to. Thanks so much, John.
well, thank you, Betsy. I really appreciate it, and keep up your great work.
Thank you. Enjoyed every minute.